let's talk about my favorite topic, drugs. Or more specifically, crystal methamphetamine, also known as ice. Now I want to tell you today about how the methamphetamine epidemic in South Asia and particularly in Pakistan has its roots in Afghanistan. So the story starts with what is certainly one of the largest maritime drug busts in history. In the space of 48 hours, the Pakistan Navy's corvette, the Yarmouk, intercepted 2 sailing boats, dhows, in the Arabian Sea and recovered something like 2.5 tons of crystal methamphetamine. That's 2.5 tons of ice and about, a little piddling 50 kilos of cocaine, probably added as an appetizer. What's the street value of this bust? $972 million, which is only about $28 million less than the IMF tranche Pakistan got in the month of May. Now, this seizure was unusual for a couple of reasons. One, that the Arabian Sea isn't traditionally on the map of major drug routes in the world. I mean, this is when we're comparing it with the Atlantic route, which Central and South American gangs use to ferry drugs, mostly cocaine, to the United States of America or to Europe, or the Pacific routes, or for that matter, Southeast Asia. Now, Southeast Asia was traditionally known as the epicenter of methamphetamine production, distribution, you name it. But now it seems that it's losing out to Central and South Asia. How did that happen? Now, first of all, you got to understand that meth use and meth seizures is on the rise globally, right? For every seizure that you have, you can easily assume that 10 consignments make it to someone's crack pipe. The rise in methamphetamine use is obviously a rise in demand, means you got to have a rise in supply and you got to have a lot more players entering the market. So now let's trace this back. In the last 10 years, we've seen in Pakistan in particular a massive rise in methamphetamine addiction. You've got ice addicts walking the streets. You've got a plethora of news stories about meth-related crime. You go talk to the cops, you go talk to drug rehab centers, and they'll tell you that about 60 to 70 to sometimes in some places, like in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, 90% of their patients in the drug rehabs are ice addicts. That's a huge change because about 10 years ago, or a little more than 10 years ago, the drug of choice was heroin, which also used to largely come in from Afghanistan, surprise, surprise. But now it's all been replaced by meth. Now, Pakistan, unfortunately, isn't just consuming drugs, it's also being used as a trafficking route. How do we know this? In November 2020, there was a joint operation by the Pakistan Coast Guards and the Pakistan Army off the Makran coast of Pakistan. Now there, in this area called Pasni, they found about 100 kilos of ice, nicely packed in bags, hidden in caves in hills. Obviously, it was dumped there for the next guys in the supply chain to pick it up, load it onto these small sailing boats, and take it on to the high seas to whatever destination they were going to eventually target. Just a year after that, one of these ships was also caught off the Makran coast, and there we found about 200 kilos of ice. So that's a double of what was caught last year. Again, for every interception means at least 10, if not more, consignments are actually getting through. So where does this cargo go once the smugglers make it onto the high seas? So one destination that we know about is Sri Lanka. How do we know this? Because in 2020, the same year that the drug bust took place in Pakistan's Makran coast, 2 trawlers carrying about 100 kg of ice and about 400 kg of heroin were intercepted off the Sri Lankan coast, probably by the Indian Navy. At that time, this drug bust, valued at about $33 million, not that much in the larger scale of things, obviously hell of a lot of money for me, hopefully for you, but not for the drug dealers. It was called the largest drug bust in Sri Lanka's history. But that record didn't last long because about 4 years later, they caught another ship, this time with 400 kilos. So that's a 4-fold increase over what they caught just a few years ago. So now we know something about where the meth is being used. We know a little bit about one route that the meth dealers are using to traffic their wares. But where is it coming from? Like I said earlier, most signs, if not all signs, point to Afghanistan. Now, here's an interesting story. Now, first of all, don't take my word for this. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime raised the alarm way back, I think in like 2017. They did it again 2 years ago, and they said that Afghanistan is now an emerging producer in the methamphetamine world, and that methamphetamine linked to Afghanistan has been reported seized from as far away as the European Union, the Near East, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and even Eastern Africa. They're not the only ones to be raising the alarm. The International Narcotics Control Board echoed the UNODC by saying that the increase in meth production in Afghanistan poses, and I quote, serious challenges to its neighbors, of which Pakistan, to our eternal regret, is one. But okay, that's all fine. But this does beg the question, how do we know that the meth is coming from Afghanistan? I mean, what, do they like stamp on it, made in Kabul? No, of course, nothing of the sort. Now, to find out the answer to that question, to determine the answer to that question, we first got to take a short look at how meth is made. Now, unlike other like class A hard drugs like heroin or like cocaine, crystal methamphetamine does not need a natural precursor. What do I mean by that? You need, if you want to make heroin, you got to have the poppy plant. If you want to make cocaine, you got to have coca leaves. With crystal meth and with methamphetamine, it is a purely chemical process. I'm not going to tell you the entire formula because A, I don't know it, and B, you've probably already watched Breaking Bad. And if you have, you'd know that one of the main ingredients, this is the stuff you can't do without, ladies and gentlemen, is ephedrine and pseudoephedrine. Now, that doesn't mean that these are bad things, right? Pseudoephedrine and ephedrine are legitimate chemicals. They're used in pharmaceuticals the world over. Cough syrup, cough drops, so on and so forth. It's a long list. But to get an adequate supply of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, you kind of have to have either a pharmaceuticals industry or a chemicals industry. And we're talking about Afghanistan, which has no industry to speak of, period. So how on earth are they producing so much meth that not only is it going all over the world, but like the watchdogs, the people who keep an eye on these things, are raising the alarm? Well, here's an interesting story. So what we have to blame here is a little weed, a little herb called Ephedra. Now, Ephedra grows wild just about all over Afghanistan and almost certainly in other countries as well. And some years ago, around 2015, some enterprising, would-be Heisenbergs figured out that, hey, we can probably distill ephedrine from the Ephedra plants. That's when this job started, and then just 3 years later, the Ephedra method of making methamphetamine was the method of choice around in all of Afghanistan. How do we know this? The first time this story got to mainstream media was when journalist Lindsay Billing interviewed the then head of Afghanistan's counter-narcotics police, Khalid Nabizada. Now, Khalid Nabizada showed her rooms full of seized crystal meth. Like I said, use in Afghanistan had been increasing, seizures had been increasing, production had been increasing. And then he showed her the Ephedra plant. And he was like, hey, dude, these guys have figured out how to make ephedrine from Ephedra. Now, how did they do this? Now, here's the funny part. In the early 2010s, in neighboring Iran, there was a major crackdown on methamphetamine users and methamphetamine dealers. And so the legend goes, a lot of these chemists ran over to the lawless border provinces of Afghanistan. And these are mostly like the lawless, less governed provinces of Afghanistan where the Taliban held sway. And if you know anything about the Taliban, they're always looking to make a quick buck to fund their activities. And there was no quicker buck than crystal methamphetamine. And it's a lot of bucks too, because way back in 2021, that's like a good 4 years ago, it was estimated that just one district in the province of Farah produced about $240 million worth of meth. Again, that's one district in one province. And again, now, so we know all of this. You might still think that this is some kind of anti-Afghan propaganda. Because after all, when the UNODC says that this meth was traced to Afghanistan, how can they be sure? Well, the answer is really simple, and the answer lies in the same way that the meth is made: chemistry. They check for trace chemicals, they check for chemical markers, and what they found is that the meth caught off of Pakistan's coast in Pasni and on the high seas, and in Sri Lanka and in Indonesia and in East Africa and all of these places that are already mentioned, had the chemical markers of methamphetamine that had been produced not by using ephedrine, not by using pseudoephedrine or any traditional methods, but by using extracts from the Ephedra plant. Now, Afghanistan's the perfect place to do this, and I'm not the one saying this. Khalid Nabizada said that now international buyers of meth that is, know that you can make meth easily and cheaply in Afghanistan. The chemicals used are not controlled, and the Ephedra plant is literally everywhere. Then there's David Mansfield. He's an independent researcher who's followed these trails for about 25 years, and he echoes Nabizada, and he says that there are few places in the world where such large-scale harvesting of ephedra, transport, processing, and cross-border trade would be possible other than Afghanistan. Now, here's the thing. This adds a curious new dimension to the trouble that Pakistan has been having with Afghanistan. And in particular, it kind of gives you a clue as to why the Afghan Taliban are so insistent that Pakistan not fortify or secure its border with Afghanistan. It's not just that they want to make territorial claims, it also seems to be because they want their meth lifelines to keep flowing. Like they always say, if you want to find out who's behind something, just follow the money.